Our Dr. Joli Hamilton joins the show today. This is a very unique episode. For me, it is. I imagine for you, it's not. For a lot of people, it's not. But so your website reads, are you ready for polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, and or creative monogamy? Um, Piqued my interest. And then so when your assistant reached out, I was like, would you be interested? I was like, yeah, this is not something I have a ton of familiarity with. You clearly do. um I think it's one of those things that a lot of people think about, but don't really talk about, and there's a stigma
Yep.
around this. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, first of all, how's it going?
Great. Great. It's autumn in New England. I mean, I can't do better than
Where in
this.
New
This is
England
it.
are you?
I'm in Western Massachusetts. So
Nice.
the pretty rolling hills piece of Massachusetts.
Nice. I grew up in upstate New York, so not too far from
Oh,
there.
yeah.
So very familiar with. I'm in North Carolina right now, but so very familiar with the falls, the best time of year. But your winter is coming very quickly,
It is true. Winter is coming. That is very true.
turning into a Game of Thrones episode. Um, but yeah, this is going to be a really interesting conversation. I also want to mention too that you're a podcast host of Playing with Fire and you're a professor of psychology, which is very interesting to me in general, let alone the whole polyamory aspect of this. And I know you also specialize in jealousy a lot.
Yes.
I can't wait
That's
to
my
dive.
research base. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't wait to dive into that. There's just so much to touch on here. It's hard for me to pick an avenue of like where to start, but I guess where did you start? I mean, I guess that's a great place to begin is like where did you start with this research and why? And then we could talk about some of your findings.
Yeah. So first off, I mean, like so many people, I started because I screwed everything up. I tried something new and I did it all really badly. And my way of dealing with that is to study. So when I opened up my marriage, it went to hell really, really quickly, and jealousy was out of hand. As I studied my way out, I accumulated a bachelor's degree and a master's degree, then a doctorate, then another master's. And along the way, decided to specialize in sexuality and jealousy because what I was finding is the problems I had were completely foreseeable. Like they were so foreseeable, but we're just not talking about them. They're not talked about, and we stigmatize relationships that are other than monogamy. But 20% of people in North America have tried non-monogamy at some point in their life. So maybe we should just have a conversation because that's the same number of people as who play musical instruments or own cats. So we should all be at least talking about this so we
Well,
know
here's a question for
what's
you.
going on.
I have a lot of questions for you. So you said 20% practices. How many people openly talk about that of the 20%?
Yeah. So of the 20% who've tried it at some point, about 5 or 6% are doing it at any one time. And the number of people who are openly, publicly out is a tiny fraction of that. And there are real reasons why. I mean, I'm out publicly in all areas of my life. But realistically, many people are frightened. They're afraid to be part of a group that is stigmatized and marginalized. So it is a small number of people who actively talk about it, say in their workplaces or amongst their community members. However, how many of us have been at a party somewhere and heard, oh, they've got a thing? Oh, you know them. Or how many of us know that in our area, the people who have two red Adirondack chairs or whose door is painted purple or what, or are wearing black bands on their right side, like all of these things are signals that somebody might be in the lifestyle. And then we've got our polyamorous folks who are taking it to the next level because they're not just swinging, they're actively building multiple conscious, negotiated relationships, loving relationships. So it's a lot of people, as in it's many, many hundreds of thousands of people, but we're not talking about it the way we should.
Mm. Well, there's more to your story, but I kind of want to get into you were married and you opened it up. So when you
Yeah.
got married, obviously you took a vow. I got married 2 years ago, took a vow, um, plan on sticking to it. So like when you got married, did you have these ideas in your head? Like what changed and how in the world do you approach this with a married partner? I'm just baffled by that.
Yeah. So, we live in a social setting that compels us to be monogamous and heterosexual still. We're supposed to be we're supposed to fit the mold. I got engaged when I was 17. I got married when I was 20. So
Mm.
no, I didn't know that there was anything else. Nobody had ever said any of these words to me. Nobody ever asked me, hey, how many people do you think you can love at a time? Nobody asked me. Who's asking that question? Um, oh God, I really wish they had. Now I have 7 children of my own. I do ask them these questions. But I don't think there was anything that anybody around me could have done to help me understand it because they didn't understand that, in fact, monogamy is one way of building relationships. And it's great. It works wonderfully for many people. And if that is you, I celebrate you. I love that for you. And we know monogamy doesn't fit everybody. Just look at the divorce rates, look at the cheating rates. We know that people are practicing non-consensual non-monogamy all the time. So for me, it was about realizing, acquiring language. The first time I heard somebody describe polyamory, and they were talking about being in love with 2 people, I'm like, oh, I've been in love with 2 people over and over again. I don't do anything about it because I'm a married woman. So I would never do that. When I had that language, and this is so many people in my studies have said the same thing, they heard the description of what it is to just be, to have the capacity to want more than one person at a time in a loving, caring way. And they thought, oh, that's me. Well, what the hell does that mean? But if you are currently in a partnership where you made that vow specifically to not engage with any others, right? If you made that promise, bringing it up is a sensitive thing. You are bringing in a topic that most people think they're never going to have to think about again. But that's life too. We do change and grow. I don't ever advise that someone simply ignore it, but that also doesn't mean we have to act on it. Just because we want something doesn't mean we have to get it.
So when you were originally married, were you wanting to find someone else to fall in love with, or did that
No.
happen naturally? Because I'm thinking like, my focus and my intentions are purely on my wife. I don't even have time to like fall in love with anybody else, even if I wanted to. So kind of almost like, how does that happen? Did that just happen naturally from going to a yoga
I think
class or something like that? Or like what happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens in many different ways for many people, but the more isolated you are, the less likely it's going to happen. The more genuine friends you have, the more likely you are to find yourself having loving, caring feelings about someone else and really questioning, like, well, what does that mean exactly? Because I also can love my friends and not act on that
True.
in any sort of sexual or emotionally romantic ways. So what does this mean exactly? No, I wasn't seeking anyone, although I'm pansexual. So, nobody ever questioned the fact that I would have crushes on girls, including my husband. He never questioned the fact that I had crushes on girls. He knew all about it. It was completely normal. We talked about it in our sex life. It was spice, right? For the bedroom. It was when all of a sudden I had a crush on a boy. I had a crush on someone with a penis. All of a sudden this was different. For me, it wasn't. I'm pansexual. It did not occur to me that this was different. I'm like, what? How is this different from the 10 girls I've talked about over the last 17 years? It wasn't intentional. However, some of us really are just open to multiplicity in this
Mhm.
way.
Mhm.
So what do you do? My thing is, I want people to be able to talk about this so that they're not creating secret partnerships, so that they're not cheating. Like I have absolutely no bandwidth for lying in my life,
Yeah.
and I'm like allergic to lying. So I told my partner immediately. Every time I ever had a crush, I told them immediately because that's me. And I wish more people had relationships where they could talk about this.
So knowing that you've approached this before with a partner, if not multiple partners, like what are tips and advice if people are like, okay, this is ringing a bell for me. I'm in this boat. I have
Yeah.
no clue how to approach this with my significant other. Like, what are some tips and advice that you would give to the people in that position?
Yeah, well, there's a couple different places you might find yourself. So if you're just listening to a podcast, a random podcast that like you listen to for other reasons, and here's Jolie, what the hell is she talking about? But you hear this and you're like, wait, this does describe an experience I've had. Okay, let's imagine that you have no particular person in mind. It's just that over the years you've noticed, yeah, I do want more novelty in my life. I do fall for other people. I do have big feelings. I think she's describing me. That is one position to find yourself in. Another is, oh, it's that person. I want a relationship with that person, and I want to build that. And those are two different experiences, because on the one hand, we're talking about essentially having, like you said, turned your attention to someone specific. On the other, you're starting to recognize an identity and a capacity. If I could go back and tell my earlier self something, I would say, all of those times that you had little crushes, ones that didn't feel like you needed to take big action on, those were signs. Those were signs that you have the capacity to experience multiple relationships. Pay attention to that, because at some point, that might be something you want to act on. Start talking about that in your relationship now, because this is exactly what creates space to grow apart from my partner. We think that monogamy is just like the default setting. It's not a biological default setting. It is a cultural default, and those are two different things. So I think we should have conversations with our partners, ideally, about, yeah, how do you feel about other people? Do you find other people hot? If we imagine that our partners are never going to have another hot dream about anyone else, we are setting ourselves up for a strong disappointment down the
Right.
road.
We're all human. We're all human.
Right.
So I
And I
agree with
want to
that.
know, like, I want to know really. So if monogamy is your jam, if that's what you want, my question is, cool, what's your fidelity agreement? How do you know that you're in the lines? I've done hundreds of interviews with monogamous people for my studies on jealousy. And I ask them, so what are your fidelity agreements? Describe them to me. 2 people have been able to actually describe what their actual agreements are. They know exactly where the lines are. They know what's expected. They know the boundaries. Most people rely on this sort of nebulous sense of, like he knows, he knows. And like she would never, but like, we know, we just know. If we all knew, the cheating rates would not be so high in the double digits, right? We don't actually know. And so many people describe to me situations where they really genuinely felt that they were inside the boundaries, and their partner's like, oh, no, you weren't. No, you weren't. So to me, this is really part of a spectrum of conversations. Monogamy too. We need to have these conversations about, what are we doing? What are our relationship agreements? We got to get stuff out of the implicit expectation and make it explicit, make it absolutely clear what we expect, and then revisit it. Because if we're talking about long-term relationships, I was with my first husband for 17 years, married for 13. I am now with my second husband for 15 years, married 11. We change. We're not the same. So plan to revisit those conversations over time.
Another quote from your website is, there is nothing I find more satisfying than thoughtfully talking about stuff that makes most people uncomfortable.
Oh, yeah.
You
yeah.
love this.
That's
This
it.
is people are like, oh, how do I even approach this? Here's a question for you. So if someone finds themselves in a married situation, and I know you're kind of talking about, well, I'm putting time and energy towards someone else, right? And I'm like, I have a crush here. What do you say to the perspective? Well, you should be putting that time and energy into your main relationship, working on fixing it, and or working on the communication or whatever the issue is, instead of towards someone else. Like it's almost like seen as like an out, not putting the energy towards the main relationship. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's an assumption in there. So the very question you asked, it means that just because I have attention to spend on someone else, there's something wrong in this prior relationship. So I have an established relationship. I turn attention. I have 7 kids. I had the first one. Then when I had another one, I had to figure out how to have more attention to spend. I'm not saying we should all have multiple lovers, but some of us really do have the capacity to have multiple important, valuable relationships in our lives. And it doesn't mean anything is broken or needs fixing. And I defy anyone to find a better emotional communicator than I am. And I love having other partners, and I'm not alone. A lot of us actually thrive on, in fact, there's a bit of a mythology around open relationships, this idea that it would just be people who are avoidant and don't want a good, solid, strong relationship. The research actually says the opposite. People who have some anxious relationship tendencies can do absolutely beautifully in non-monogamy because they love having tons of communication, lots and lots of hard conversations, and they're in it and they're really working things out with people. So if they can do the work to manage their jealousy, to manage all the complexities of multiple relationships, they can thrive. And it doesn't mean that any of those relationships is problematic or in any way flawed.
We're going to get to jealousy in a little bit. I kind of want to keep hitting on some things here. What are your thoughts on, for the people listening to this, is like, well, why bother getting married?
Mm.
So I guess that's my question to you
Sure.
is, I mean, I understand you were really young the first time. I get that. As far
Oh,
as
yeah.
like the second time of being married, there's probably people that thought, well, just be single and then who cares? Nobody cares about this. But so why get married, I guess, is the question I would have.
Why did you get married?
I mean, because she's the greatest. She's probably listening to this. She's the greatest. She is by far my better half. I found the person I really wanted to spend my life with and grow a family with, and I can lean on and rely on. And she allowed me to be me, which I think was, not was, is a huge benefit to me, is that she supports me in my dreams and I support her in her dreams. We're two individuals that we've kind of come together, but we're able to keep who we truly actually are. We haven't had to change each other to be in this relationship. So she elevates me as a person, and I hopefully I do the same for her. And we've since grown our family, having a kid, and I know I'm babbling on here, but hopefully that
She's
makes
awesome.
some sense. Yeah, she's
It
great.
it makes total sense. I got married for the
I
same
put a
reason.
ring on it.
Yeah, I got
So,
married for the same exact reason.
okay.
I met someone who I found actually can have a truly thriving relationship with me, can meet the full version of me. Also, by the way, the state privileges marriage. So remember that a lot of people get married because in this culture, if you don't get married, you can't have health insurance. You don't get married, you can't visit people in the hospital. Like there are real reasons why people
Yeah.
sign on that dotted line that have nothing to do with that beautiful description you just offered. But I actually did. I married my second husband because he meets me, the whole version of me. And as I have grown and changed, he has leveled up and shifted and changed and grown and continues to meet me. And both of us also have other partners. And no, nothing in that detracts from our experience of each other as individuation partners.
So can I assume before you tied the knot, you had this whole conversation and everybody was on the same page?
Yeah, yeah. So in this particular relationship, we came into it open. We were both like, yep, this is what we want. And so we navigated it. We did a year of exploring monogamy together because he doesn't love dating. He's just not really into it.
Oh, that's terrible.
He's just not super into it. And it's it's one of those things that you do have to enjoy to a degree. But we came into it, had these negotiations, and I I can't imagine. We tried monogamy and I was like, yeah, but why do I need to promise you that I'll never fall for anyone else? And he says it better than I do. Go ahead.
So here's a question. Like
Yeah.
on what date do you have this conversation with a partner?
Ah,
Hey, by the way, date 1, date 10?
well,
When does this happen?
That depends what you're doing. So people experience non-monogamy in many different ways. But imagine this. So you've heard my description. I experience non-monogamy as sort of a baseline setting for me. I know I have this capacity. I know that philosophically, I am aligned with creating relationships that do not focus on like an ownership model. It does not work for me philosophically. Even though I know how to behave in monogamy, it's actually not hard. I can do it really easily, but I just don't align with it. So for me, every single date, immediately, like everyone I have ever dated knows that this is me, except that first guy who I married out of high school. But I didn't know it then. Um, Everybody else, first date, and this is what I will always recommend. If you know this is your identity, tell them immediately. It should be on your dating profile. It should be part of the normalization of who you are. However, some people don't know. There is no, if you don't know that this is you, if you're just open to it, well, I don't know. What do you want right now? Really, monogamy and non-monogamy both have troubles, challenges, difficulties to work through. What do you feel like working on? You know, what I definitely don't recommend, do not date as if you are dating for that one true love, the Disney-fied version of marriage. Don't date like that and then keep this in your back pocket, because that's no good. All you're doing is setting yourself and your partner up. Don't do it. Come clean.
Yeah.
There's enough of us who do appreciate this. You don't have to hide this.
Well, hiding anything is a burden, especially bringing
Yeah,
it to a relationship and hiding like a big part of who you are. That's just not a way to live. And then the whole like
exactly.
Disney thing, like for what it's worth, I'm asking curious questions. I'm not even pushing back on this, like on your thought process and stuff, because I don't necessarily disagree. I know like we're human nature. I'm pretty damn sure this has been going on for probably thousands and thousands of years.
Since the beginning.
Yeah, since the beginning, right?
We're animals, right? So if you just, like think about as we moved into what we would call societies, there's plenty of research that points out that we were still animals. And then we move into tribal societies, and sexual fidelity is kind of late on the hit list of human inventions. If you just look at like, when did we decide that sexual fidelity was important?
It's a good question.
It's very late. You can read Sex at Dawn if you're interested in that, Christopher Ryan's work.
Um, is there a society in the world today that promotes this in a positive aspect?
Well, it's interesting. There are lots of societies that have multiple forms of relationships. But when you say this, there's no one this,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So personally, I identify as polyamorous. I have a very particular way I talk about that. But there are people who are swinging. There are people who are polysexual. There are people who are open relating, but they consider themselves, they're actually way more over toward monogamy. So there is no this to talk about. So I find it a little challenging. Most people immediately go over and think about like polygamy. That is not what we're talking about. That is actually a patriarchal system. It's connected to multiple religions. There are some societies that also practice polyandry, where there are multiple husbands for one woman. But really, the question is, what works for you? What works for you? And for some people, the fact that it is out of the ordinary for their social setting is enough reason for them to be like, you know what? I think I do have an interest, but it's just too complicated. So I often meet people who are in the middle years of their life. Most of my work is with people who are in their mid years, and they're like, okay, I followed all the rules. I played the game the way society told me to. I got married. I raised my kids, bought my house. I have my career. Oh, but this has actually always been just kind of kicking around. Or over the last few years, I've realized like, yeah, I don't think I want to be limited to this one story of how relationships work. I want something else. So they're exploring, often between the ages of 40 and 60.
Yeah, society these days plays a huge role in how we act, what we do, our choices, our decisions, and the stigma attached. I've had numerous episodes and conversations about like mental health, the stigma
Right.
of going to see a therapist, and something's wrong. I'll go talk to somebody, and it's finally starting to crack a little bit. Do you feel that this is kind of starting to open up a little bit and be somewhat acceptable? I will say more of an open relationship status.
It absolutely is. We have the data to show that, for one thing, just generationally, if you look at who's interested or accepting of the idea, there was a study done about 4 years ago that showed about 32% of millennials were open to the idea of an open relationship, and it was even higher for Gen Z. So this is a huge number of people who are at least open to the idea.
Mhm.
Maybe they don't know whether they want it, and they're not always willing to ask people to do this with them. And Some of them are still trying to figure out how to build a family. And this culture only has one picture of how you get to build a family.
Right.
And it's a very, as a person who has 7 children, it is a very inconvenient model of how to build families, right? 2 parents, and then you try to have children and there's never enough help. We could change that. It doesn't actually have to be that way. So I'm very curious to see what happens with like Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Do they actually open their minds to family structures looking many different ways? Because this version of this nuclear family is incredibly untested, incredibly young version of what society requires.
Well, it's kind of failing too because, the divorce rate
Yes.
is, you know what I mean? And then like, who knows about like this people's parenting styles and like there is a lot of
It just
issues. So it's hard to
And it
argue that.
asks, right, it asks so much of us. And I mean, I love being a parent. I mean, I homeschooled my children the whole time, not through COVID. Like they're grown adults now, and I did it the whole time. I love being a parent, but trying to do relationships with the single person who also is the only person who can help you raising children, keeping a mortgage, building your business, doing all those things. It is a lot of pressure to put on just one social relationship, but we're told that that's the way it should be. It's really just one option. But our current imagination of relationships is that is not just the only option, but it's also ideal. Maybe it is for some people ideal, but what if
Mhm.
it's just one option? So I think of my own kids who all of them at this point say very clearly, they're like, no, I feel like monogamy is the way for me. I'm like, cool, that's awesome. I love that for you. And they know that there are other options. So if they're presented with this question, they're not locked in. But most people have to actually do a whole bunch of unpacking. If a partner brings this to you, you're like, oh my gosh, this is mind breaking. I like to think of this as a conversation we should just have. It should be one of the things. Just the same, I'm so glad none of my kids would ever have to have a hard conversation about coming out
Mm.
because
Mm.
I don't know what their sexuality is. I don't know what their orientation is. They're going to have to tell me. I don't know, but I'm certainly not going to assume they're straight. That's wildly inappropriate to me, given what we know about, humans. And I feel the same way about relationship structures. Like, what if we just relax our grip and say, monogamy will be there for all the people who choose it. And there are other options too.
Yeah, it's for me personally, it's like the older I get, the less judgmental I am. It's like if someone says, "Hey, I'm gay," or whatever, like I don't, that's great for you. Like that's great,
Do you find love? Thank
wonderful.
goodness.
Yeah, exactly. That's great. Like 15-year-old me obviously has a lot of growing up to do. Just like, you know, walking around someone has like purple hair. It's kind of like, oh, yeah, that's what they want. It makes them happy. Good for them. Like it doesn't bother me. That's just like it's great for them. As long as they're expressing their creativity and their freedom and they love it and I'm happy for
Right.
them. We're a happier place when everyone's happy for themselves, right? And they're allowed to be
Exactly.
themselves.
Exactly.
Um, I got two questions here. But as far as like you brought up the children aspect, I'm guessing you've had this conversation with your kids. So was it
Mhm.
apparent? Was it very clear to them? And or did you
Well, I
kind of
lived in
sit
a
them
triad.
down? Okay, so
I
it was
lived in I
clear.
lived in a triad for years.
So
So
how was that for from a children's perspective? Because that's obviously probably not what Jimmy and Tommy and Jennifer's parents at school are doing. So there's probably like,
yeah.
hey, I'm feeling judged here. Like how do you handle that?
Well, so first off, I mean, I've always been the kind of person who presented my children with a plurality, right? Like we don't think about the mono mind here. We really are talking about how difference is the normal in our human experience. So for them, my having more than one partner is just like, oh, there's mom. That's just how mom happens to be different. They also know I'm bi. Yep. Like, okay. So sometimes mom's dating a girl. They don't, because it's part of their life from the time they're very young, they treat it the same way all teenagers do. They're like, shrug. I don't really care about my parents' sex life. Do you care about your
Right.
parents' sex life? I mean, and my kids are now 17 to 25. So now I can have adult conversations with them where we talk about this and I can get those retrospectives. In fact, one of my kids just recorded an episode for my own podcast with me, because they were like, yeah, I want to tell people what it was like to grow up in a house where you just be whoever you are. And so do the parents. And what we focus on is everybody in this house safe? Is everybody in this house cared for? Is everybody in this
Mm,
house loved for who they are?
mm.
So yeah, was it different from their friends? Yeah, most of their friends think it's hysterical and interesting. And they want to ask me all the questions because I'm also a sex educator. So their friends are like, you have the details. Tell us everything.
So have you dealt with instances where I won't have to say it felt like you've had to like explain yourself, or you felt like you're being judged by people, friends, family, all that kind of stuff? Like, how do you handle situations like that?
Yeah, discrimination is real. Open relationships are discriminated against. We have data on that. They are medically discriminated against. They are discriminated against in housing situations, in legal proceedings, custody proceedings. So that is real. And one of the reasons people don't always come out about this, and it's why most of us know people who are open relating, but they don't tell us because they don't know that we're a safe person to tell. I have absolutely faced discrimination. My way of dealing with that is to be louder. I'm a double Leo. I don't give a fuck.
I can kind of tell.
so yeah, I went and honestly, I'm married to somebody who he's incredibly he's incredibly relaxed about it all. He would never like no one, he's so unassuming, but the idea that someone would judge his relationship as less than, honestly, he would just laugh. He would just be in their space like, wow, it's so funny that you think you get to comment on my relationship. So we handle that from that perspective. Some people really do take a hit and it is a
Mm,
struggle for them. And often that comes from an internal sense of they're still struggling with, is this okay? Is this wrong? And so I call that internalized polyphobia, where it's not like, oh yeah, they've gotten to the mental place where they're like, sure, everybody should just be happy, everybody should do what they want, love who you love, but they still have this little inner voice that's saying, yeah, but it's wrong for you. So just like internalized homophobia really puts us in an inner schism, internalized polyphobia can do the same thing. So a person in that situation, they're often struggling with not just discrimination that they're afraid of in the outer world, but they're also really struggling to feel safe in their inner world. And that's why I do the work I do, because I don't want anybody to suffer through that. I don't want anybody to feel like they're alone, because you're not alone. There's a lot of us.
interesting. Yeah, and the word that keeps coming to my mind is like acceptance. Like I would imagine they'd feel a whole lot better if they were accepted by like their friends or family. Like I don't want to assume your parents are alive. I'm not sure if you have you
No, they're
had
dead, unfortunately, but they did know. They
they
did
didn't
know
know.
before
How
they
did you
died.
approach that with your parents? And did they look at you kind of sideways, or were they accepting of this?
I moved in into a triad. They knew immediately, and my parents, they like blue collar, old school New England. Um, they were like, "That's weird." Moving on. They like they just they really they treated it, and as the years passed, so my father lived much longer. So my father lived through about a decade of my non-monogamy. And as the years passed, I remember him asking me questions and being like, how does this work? How does that work? I don't understand. And it was always this question from like, I had no idea. And that would have fixed some problems. I didn't
Huh.
really like he was like it was like he was doing the backwards math and going, wow, we could have really addressed some things if we'd thought about it that way. And he was great about me talking about it. Like we had a really easy relationship in talking about sex and relationships because he really just didn't think it was any of his business to decide what
Hmm.
anybody else should do. So I think I had the best possible deal when it comes from parents, and not everybody gets that.
That's a great perspective on life, period. You get along better in life just if you think that way. But yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, we as society, not to bring up the election coming up, you have the election coming up, you see how freaking like everybody is just so strong minded. We would be in such a better place if people were just open minded about like religion, beliefs, societal norms, all that kind of stuff, and just like give people a chance. But
Right.
you really see it, especially now, like I said, with the election coming up, that people are
Yeah.
not accepting of other people. You walk down the street and you see a Trump flag, you see a Harris flag, and they just want to fight each other immediately. It's like,
Right.
Jesus Christ, it's not really a society for that, you know?
It's and this is where we have to come back to the core idea of like, can we just be in plurality? Can we just exist in there is no one right way? And if we can, then yeah, I mean, I live in a very red pocket in a very blue state. And I like I feel very comfortable with my neighbors. I feel very comfortable because I am out and they have totally not just accepted me. They're like, that's you. It's not just about tolerance. It's about, look, that's you. That's not a judgment of me. They're
Mhm.
not so childish as to think that my life is a judgment of theirs. And that's where I think I see as a psychologist, we get hung up when we take other people's decisions as an indictment of ourselves. And this is where, like my father, you know what he struggled with? I went back to school at 35 and I got all those degrees. And when I signed on for my PhD, that was it. That was like a road he could not cross. And when, like, he really struggled. He was like, why? Why would you do that? What are you going to do with it? How's that going to, you're never going to make money back. I don't understand. So that it was interesting for me. He was okay with the open marriage. He was okay with my bisexuality. He was okay with my wild 7 children all being homeschooled. And it was all crazy. But the PhD was just a bridge too far because it wasn't about me. It was actually, he was measuring himself against that. And inside, he was like, oh, what does that mean about where I didn't reach? And so we would sit and talk about that and about how he wanted different things from his life. And that wasn't a good or bad. This wasn't a value judgment. I don't think people with PhDs are better than people who never went to college or never graduated high school. But to be able to sit with that and really have a conversation, yeah, that's some grown up work.
That's, I mean, honestly, amazing that you had at least a dad. I can't count on your mom that was pretty introspective and sounds like decently open-minded once you had a conversation about things. A lot of us are that fortunate. We're growing up in a household where we're basically forced, even in society, we're forced upon their beliefs, like whether it's like religion or thought process and any of that stuff. So to have a relationship with to be able to talk about this stuff with their parents a lot. I don't have that. I definitely don't have that relationship with my parents to talk about this detail. So for you to have that and to actually come to some kind of an agreement sounds wonderful. A lot of people just
It's
unfortunately aren't in that boat.
totally we don't and it's so unfortunate when I work with clients who don't have that. I mean, I think I mean I have a lot of mother energy and a lot of my clients come to work with me because they could use that in their life. They could
Yeah.
use an accepting maternal energy in their life. Someone to say, yeah, this isn't about right or wrong. And I really did luck out. My parents had, there was no reason for them to have been as accepting as they were, but they were this kind of accepting. When I was a little kid, I got to decide whether I went to church. They didn't go to church. I got to decide. So I went. I went all the way through. I did the whole thing because I liked it. I liked to sing. There was like an organ there and I liked it. If you don't have that, if you don't have that, then you got to be it. I lucked out. I had that. My, most of my partners have not had that. So the option is be it. That's all there is.
What is your thought? Because you said you went to church. I grew up Irish Catholic. I'm assuming you might be similar in Massachusetts.
I am Protestant. I was raised Congregationalist.
What are your thoughts on religion now that you live kind of like the lifestyle that you live? Because, you know, when you grow, you know this when you grow up, like you're supposed to find your soulmate, which I don't necessarily believe in. I don't really believe in soulmates, honestly. You're supposed to find your soulmate, and then when you get married, you take a vow and get married in a church, and you know, the one person for the rest of your life. You don't believe in divorce, all that kind of stuff. So, just genuinely curious, when did your view perhaps change on religion when it came to
Oh,
this?
I was the 7-year-old who was arguing with my minister. I went to church and I would fight with him. I so it like it never made sense to me. As a little kid, I remember memorizing verses and saying, "No, it doesn't make any sense. You can't tell me that there's." And I remember the year I learned the word benevolent. You can't have a benevolent God and have hell. And I would just go and stand in his office and argue with him about it. So for me, it wasn't so much a
How did
change
that
as
go?
it great. Actually, really well. I was really lucky to be, And I think this is a thing about Congregationalist ministers. They are really tolerant of just being with the conversation. So my experience was that it wasn't antithetical. No, I don't believe in a punishing patriarchal anything.
Mhm.
I don't believe that. And I don't think that that's misaligned with the teachings of Christ. I don't consider myself a Christian now, but I've read the Bible and I don't find any problem aligning myself with the words of Jesus, the red words in the Bible. I don't have any trouble with that because it's about love. It's about compassion for others. It's about showing up in truth and supporting others and truly being there for them. There's no conundrum for me. It just doesn't, it's easy for me to be with the multiplicity of that.
That's wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here is like, I've actually had this conversation before, whereas like, I don't necessarily go to church much anymore. I guess you can kind of say, like, as far as religion goes for me personally, is like, I don't know. I question a lot of things. I question everything in life. And I think everybody should.
You know what else? Can I just say something else on religion though?
Yeah. Go ahead.
There, I have a surprising, like shocking number of clients who are deeply religious, who are in the religious, in the Bible Belt. They are the swinger community is filled with deeply conservative religious people who also don't find that there is a problem. There is no problem here. So I think it's an interesting thing for people who some people enjoy judging others. If you enjoy judging others, your religion is one of the tools you could do that with. But if you don't enjoy judging others, if you just like sitting with the like, wow, I don't feel that way, but that's yours, then yeah, it's a wonderful thing to realize that yeah, there's a whole lot of people out there who are like, I want sexual novelty and I want to go to church on Sunday. Why do I have to choose?
Right.
Why do I have to
Right.
choose? So they don't. So they don't choose.
And something I did notice also about plenty of people in my life that are very religious. Not to put this badly, a lot of times they're not the nicest people I'm known in life either. They're not like most open-minded. They're probably the most judgmental. They seem slightly oppressive, if you will. Um, so yeah, I was just genuinely curious about the whole religion aspect, and I I know a lot of like, especially like with the religion, it's kind of like you're just born into it, right? Like mommy and daddy said you should be this, so you should be this. And then the people that you're probably talking about right there are like, well, I didn't really have a choice. I just grew up in this. This isn't really who I really wanted to be. It reminds me of the book of the Four Agreements. Have you read the Four Agreements?
Yeah. Yeah. Tom Miguel. Yep.
Yep, yep. And that's something I occasionally read or listen to. It reminds me of one of those. I forget the actual agreement off the top of my mind, but it was kind of like, just because you're born in this situation doesn't mean this is like who you are. So yeah, I
Right.
was just really, really curious about the religious aspect.
Well, it's so interesting to think about who exactly are we? Who are we? Are we a product of nature? Are we a product of nurture? I think most of us have come down to it's a combination. It's a little bit of both. And at the end of the day, if I want to grapple with who I am inherently going to find that I'm not exactly identical to my parents or to my tiny social circle. I am an individual and I can be an individual and still really be deeply invested in the collective in which I live. And that there's a paradoxical feeling like how do I truly individuate while also being connected to others? And that's the work that I'm doing all day long. I mean, I'm a Jungian psychologist, so I care about individuation, but individualism, like focusing on the idea that there's one right way to be, that's not helpful either, right?
Hmm.
Like that doesn't help us be better people, and it definitely doesn't help us create a safer society.
I agree. One of the greatest parts of this podcast is I'm able to take a conversation and go deep dive, and that's I kind of feel like that's what we just did a little bit. Let me bring back just a little bit too. If someone's listening to this conversation, you're like, yeah, I really want to have this conversation with my significant other. I think you're kind of giving the nudge a little bit to kind of go ahead, be yourself and talk about it. What if they're afraid of the repercussion of like, my partner is a definite no, and now they're questioning if they should even be in a relationship with me. So what are your
Yeah.
thoughts when something like that happens?
Yeah. So I have I have a protocol that I recommend that people follow, which is to say, don't set your sights on a specific person. Like that is a recipe for disaster, because now that person becomes a focal point of jealousy. Don't do that. Don't decide that you have to have this opening happen in a specific way on a specific timeline. It has to happen for you right now. And also recognize, like, yeah, your partner gets, like, they get to say what they want to. So don't have too many preconceived notions. So when I say to people, I want you to be yourself. I do want you to share who you are. Approach your partner that way. Approach them and say, so I've been listening to some podcasts. I came across a book, or just and wherever it is that you saw this. Maybe you saw a movie, maybe you saw a TV show where you just saw a hint of this idea of openness. What if instead you go to your partner and you say, so I know that this isn't what we signed on for. I get it. And I'm feeling this resonance. I'm feeling that there's something I want to explore here. And I don't want to hurt us. I don't want to hurt us. So I'm curious, would you explore this with me? Would you explore it as a mental exploration? I always tell people the very first explorations are going to be about your fantasy life. Can you talk about sex? Can you talk about emotional intimacy? Do you have repair skills? Can you do something I call inviting in the imaginal third? If you can bring the imaginal third into your fantasies, okay, now we got a little data collection going on. What if my fantasies now include this idea of a threesome, include this idea of group sex? And does that shut my partner down? Because you said something interesting. You said, what if I want to bring this to my partner, but I know that it's a no? How do you know? Like, if before I talk to my partner about something, all I've got is my idea, my projection of what their answer is. So ideally, we're fostering relationships where we actually let our partner speak for themselves. And so if I come into the conversation from the perspective of, hey, I'm really curious about this, I'm not going to act on it. I understand that would be outside the boundaries of our fidelity agreements. But would you talk about this with me? Would you explore? And the tricky part is sometimes as we explore, we find out that actually we aren't well suited to each other, because not all
Yeah.
relationships last. That's just true. We grow apart for a million different reasons, and this can be one of them. But
Yeah, I can see
withholding that
that being a
information
fear.
from my partner isn't safe. It's not safer. When I withhold this information, I see people walk down this road all the time. They have this inclination. They are interested. So they start listening to podcasts and they follow that trail for a while. And now they're deep in the podcast listening. Now they're reading some books. They're reading some articles. Maybe they're checking out websites. And now they are 9 months, 12 months, 18 months into an exploration, and their relational paradigm is shifting. They are starting to understand what it is to be in this open framework. Their partner, meanwhile, has no idea what's going on. That
Hmm.
I would never recommend. I would always ask people, like, as soon as you possibly can, bring your partner online. Do not try to know everything and then you're going to bring them on board. Don't do that. Don't do it. You're only setting yourself up for disappointment, because the further down that road you get, remember, they're going to need all that time. Plus, now you got to rebuild trust, because now you're hiding a profound interest from them. Bring them on board. Let them know who you are. And if you don't have a relationship right now where it's okay to be curious about things, maybe just start with that. Start making curiosity normal in your relationship.
Yeah, interesting. Because I'm just thinking, like, there's probably people listening to this that are kind of like, I'm just afraid of the backlash just for even saying it. And then also, if like someone said that to me, I think one of the first questions I might ask myself, or I'm sure you've heard this a lot, is, am I not enough?
Yeah, that is
So
the number one thing.
yeah. And what are your thoughts when someone says that? Because I think that's a completely normal reaction. Am I not enough? You want someone else.
Yeah. So that is the number one reaction will be, why am I not enough? And that is because here we are in this cultural milieu that says one person should be enough. And I am a person who, I really don't want to believe in soulmates. I think the idea is ridiculous. And I met mine. And then I met another one. And I was like, oh, what if there's not just one? That's
Mm,
upsetting.
mm,
What so when when we promise to forsake all others, it's an interesting promise to make. We promise that. What does it mean exactly? Does it mean that I will never show any attention to anyone else? Does it mean that I will not have friendships? What kind of friendships will I not have? Does it mean that I will never have any kind of sensual, sexual experience with anyone else? You get to have those agreements. You absolutely do. But how do we make a promise that's supposed to last 50 years? Like really, how do we make
mhm.
that promise? You do not know what's going to happen. We have no idea. Um, I I'm a big believer in commitments. I love commitments. I love commitments so very much. But I am also a big believer in having commitments that are continually renewed, that there is an opt-in element to your commitment. Because a commitment that is not made with the ability to reverse consent is pretty sketchy. Like we have some words around when things are not able to be reversed, or like your consent is not freely given anymore. Now you're
Hmm.
locked in. And the version of you who made that promise has to be the version of you who exists forever. That's not what I heard in your description of like how your wife shows up for you. She's showing up for the evolving you, for the version of
Yeah.
you who is changing. And she could ask you absolutely, like, yeah, I'm sorry, but the idea of sensual, sexual, and emotional connection with others, nope, I'm a total no for that. And then you have to deal with it. Okay, that's a no. Cool. So I can still commit to someone just because they don't want to do something for me. I once had a partner who wanted to take up golf, and I was like, that's a total no for me. It's a no. I've already had a golf husband. Don't want one. I'm a no. I am a full no for golf. I won't have golf partners. Just
It's
not into it.
amazing. Yeah, it's amazing how many things will just jade you from the past. You're like, yep, nope,
Right?
not doing that.
I won't do that. But you can absolutely have a girlfriend. Have fun. That's great. No, no problem there. We get to be our weird selves. But if we don't share who we actually are with our partner, we are burning the house down. It's just we're doing it real slow. So when people are afraid, and this is, I mean, my podcast is called Playing with Fire
Mhm.
because to question opening up, especially from a clearly defined monogamous container, from that position, it is like playing with fire. But I don't know about you, but I enjoy a nice, well contained campfire. I enjoy fireworks. I do not want to hold a firecracker in my hand.
Mm.
These are different experiences. So I like to think of this as how do I share myself while still understanding that this person I'm with may be a full no for what I want. And if I love them and I want to continue my life the way it is, then I may have to say, well, okay, so I'm going to decide I can still choose to behave monogamously while identifying as polyamorous. I can. I can also choose to negotiate around exactly what does this mean? Like, what are our agreements? I know lots of people who've come up with really creative agreements that still center on their monogamous connection, but allow for some multiplicity. I have plenty of people who've developed deep, deep, profoundly emotionally connected friendships. They don't consider themselves to be polyamorous, but the depth of these friendships, these are life partnership level friendships while they're married to someone else. I've also witnessed people make sexual fidelity agreements that include threesomes, that include going to strip clubs together, that include going to sex clubs together, that include going to desire takeovers together, but they still center on their monogamous relationship. Who's to say, like, where in this spectrum, this bouquet of relationship scenarios, what exactly are you asking your partner for? So it's not all or nothing, is I guess my point.
Interesting. And just to bring my wife up again in the situation, I do want to hit on something that I failed to mention when you asked me why I married her. I think something that I want to give her props for this is I feel that this might be the first relationship I've actually, I won't say enjoyed, but I've taken some pleasure in spending the time and the energy to make myself better and to make us better. It's actually been like it's a partnership and a commitment to do that together. Because there are a lot of times I'm sure you've seen there's relationships where it's like one person's willing to put in the work, the other one's not. They're not on the same page about that. But I will say, like, over these last 4 years that I've known her, met her, married her, and all that, like I have literally put in the work. I've enjoyed becoming a better person because of that, and I think she would say the same. So like I want to give her credit for that, and I want to bring that up because you asked me why I married her, and I think that's really important. So perhaps that's a hint or a cue, if someone's not willing to put in the work and vice versa,
Yeah.
right?
So there's something I always say. So my relationship philosophy in my anchor partnership is growth over comfort. That is the commitment that we made to each other. It is the core of our marital vows. It is the core of all of our relationship agreements, growth over comfort, which doesn't mean we never choose comfort. Sometimes we do. I mean, God, when I was writing my dissertation, I was like, hell no. I like everything needs to be about comfort except this horrible project in front of me.
Mm,
Um, but growth over comfort, when I see couples who are currently monogamous, but they center supporting each other's growth, there is no doubt in my mind that they can figure out a way to open or to explore opening and then figure out whether it works for them and then still maintain a healthy relationship, healthy in the reality that like that they are there for each other as they actually are. When somebody comes to me and their goal is stasis, their goal is to just maintain the status quo, to fit in, to have the white picket fence life, and to not have anybody rock the boat. No, that's tough. And that would be tough. You could bring that person going back to grad school or having a new business change or moving across the country or something. And those things would also be problematic to them. So that's what I look for when I think like, is this going to be an okay exploration for you? Can you explore other things? Is this the only thing that you're afraid of being too big? Because if so, well, remember, you don't know what you don't know yet. And that's what we got to find out first. Most people have no idea what they don't know about open relating.
great
They
point.
either imagine it to be awesome or really, really too hard. And it's actually just like all other relationships, just
Great point.
messy
Because
and
I don't know a
fun.
lot about it, and this is my first real deep dive conversation into it. So I'm learning a lot. That's why I'm asking so many questions. Another question I want to hit on is your expertise in jealousy. I brought it up earlier that we're going to touch on that. Let's touch on that. We can talk about jealousy in relationships, which I'm sure you're an expert at. We can just talk about jealousy in life. It's an emotion that we all have. We probably have had since we were 1 or 2 years old, since so and so
Younger even.
got the toy down the street that you wanted for Christmas and you didn't get it. So you say even younger. So when does jealousy
Yeah.
kick in? Talk about jealousy, and then we can kind of relate it to what we've been talking about.
Well, so jealousy and envy are separate. So let's sort them out first because jealousy is actually all about relationships. Jealousy happens in the context of relationships. Envy is about not having what someone else has, wanting to be who they are or have what they have. So jealousy kicks in around 5 or 6 months old. We have studies that clearly show infants develop a jealous reaction because they want to stay connected to their primary caregiver. It's very, very important that they stay connected to their primary caregiver. It's life or death. So jealousy is about a fear that a third party is going to interrupt my connection to my valued provider, right? My care provider. Envy kicks in actually a couple years later, and that is about what do I have and who am I? How am I judged? And they're both really important. In United States culture currently, we tend to conflate them. We'll say we are jealous when really we mean we're envious, and we'll even use that term jelly. Oh, I'm so jelly of your shoes, right? Like,
Yeah.
but they really are separate. And I like to sort them out because if I'm envious, many people find envy to be incredibly motivating, right? If my friend gets a promotion and I'm very envious, I can use that to motivate me. I owned a CrossFit gym for years. There is nothing that will motivate somebody to have a better snatch than watching their buddy get one. Like he puts that weight over his head, he lands it perfectly. You're going to work harder. You're absolutely, this is why we work out in groups. But when we are in a situation where jealousy is coming up, now jealousy is about threat response. I am afraid that this valued relationship will be interrupted. This is not about motivation. And oftentimes we freak out and we turn our attention, just like, do you know the myth of Hera and Zeus in the Greek mythology?
Not on top
So
of my mind.
Okay, so Hera is jealous of everybody. Hera is married to Zeus, also his sister. Don't be like Hera, but Hera is married to Zeus, and Zeus is a philanderer. He's always turning his attention to others. He is sleeping with every girl in Greece, and Hera is incredibly angry, but she does not punish Zeus. She punishes the third parties. She turns them into oxen, and she turns them into bees, and she blows them up, and because that's what she does, right? And that is what we tend to do. When we feel jealousy arise in us, we freak out. We get angry at the perceived interrupter, and we point our fingers at our partner and we're like, I feel jealous. You got to fix this. But jealousy is ours. And now I am very curious when jealousy comes up. I want to know what's going on. Is there an agreement in place? If there is an agreement in place, what exactly is happening here? Are your boundaries being violated? What's going on? Or do you not actually have an agreement? And the real problem is that you don't even know whether you actually have the relationship commitments that you think you have. But as I turn my attention to either the third party and I try to get them away from my partner, or I turn my attention to my partner and I say, fix this. Meanwhile, my body's freaking out. The nervous system reaction with jealousy is so intense. People describe what feels like life-threatening panic attacks. To learn to deal with jealousy is to learn to be in a completely different emotional space with it. My goal is never to get rid of jealousy. I am a jealousy researcher, and my goal is to have us befriend our jealousy, learn how to identify when it is giving us accurate information about, yeah, your relationship really is at threat here. And so it needs tending. Let's get into that. And when is it just, I have all these old wounds and I don't trust my partner, or my partner is a douche and they aren't actually upholding our agreements? Those are real problems. Jealousy is my friend in that moment. I don't want jealousy to go away. I want it there. I want to know when I am being tipped off to something being wrong. But some of us experience pathological levels of jealousy. And some of us have partners who try to incite jealousy. So depending on what kind of jealousy, and there are about 10 types of jealousy, depending on what kind of jealousy you're experiencing will have a lot to do with what the next steps are.
Wow, this is super interesting. This really is. And when I was doing research on you before this episode, I'm thinking of jealousy. I'm like, when was the last time I actually was jealous? And I really kind of don't remember, which to me feels great. I feel like I'm in a very secure relationship. I don't have to really necessarily worry about that. But is it a good thing? Is it good to have jealousy in small doses occasionally, or?
Well, so in this particular society, we tend to think of we want the Goldilocks amount of jealousy, right? Because we don't want too much because that feels like crap. But if we don't have any, then we're told that we're not special enough and it's not good. And it's not actually accurate. Jealousy is a personal thing. So like I'm married to someone who has a really beautiful capacity to experience jealousy and not get reactive. So when he feels jealousy, I date a lot. I'm very slutty. When he feels jealousy, he's able to just hold it and be present with it. He never gets angry about it. He never throws fits ever, not once. And that's him. But he does experience jealousy, and it is still an indicator to him of like, oh, hey, okay, what's going on? And we can get all into that. Now, I happen to experience lots of jealousy. Here I am, a professional jealousy researcher. Yes, I experience tons of jealousy, and my partner dates. So the experience of being with my jealousy is also an opportunity to know myself better. To my mind, it's not about whether we should or shouldn't have jealousy. It's about what do you do when it shows up? You said, hey, I don't think I felt jealousy for a long time. It's cool. You're not dead yet. Maybe it will. I just want people to understand that if and when jealousy shows up, it does not necessarily mean that there is anything wrong with your relationship or with you or with your partner. But we need to get really curious about what's going on. And in the exploration of jealousy, we need to not get reductive. We need to stay away from sentences like, ugh, anybody who's jealous is just insecure. No, that's oversimplifying things. Sometimes people are jealous for really good reasons. Or some people will say, oh, all jealousy is just unevolved. It's actually the exact opposite. We literally evolved jealousy as a threat detection mechanism. But some people do have overactive jealousy. It sounds like you have a pretty healthy relationship to jealousy. And in the context of the relationship structure you currently have, I would see no reason that you'd experience jealousy. There's like, why? But what if you found yourself at a party and you're watching your wife and she's off, she's far enough away that you can still see details of her body movement and stuff. And you notice that like she's talking to somebody and she's animated and she's turning her body a certain way. And you can just see that like she's feeling seen. There's something there. And you're just observing her and you're watching. You have the opportunity at that moment to either fan the flame of jealousy and make a big deal out of it, or to be like, there's my partner being seen and I trust them. Cool. That like, what's the problem
That's
here?
my thought exactly. I trust them. I have a track record of trust. So that's how
Right.
yeah.
Right. And not everybody has that. And that's where we can also get into, okay, and exactly, do you know where the line is for you? Most of
Mm.
us have a line, right? Like, okay, so would it be okay if she reached out and touched this guy's arm? Would it be okay if she if they wound up walking around the bar and they're far away from you and now they're sitting alone in a booth together? Is it okay if she makes out with somebody? We all have different
You're
lines.
testing me, Jolie. You're testing
I
me.
know, right? Like, so my line is way past all of those things. But if your
Hmm.
line is like, actually, I'm not even okay with touching. Cool, great. Does your partner know that? Can you talk about that? Because if you can, then there's no reason to think jealousy will ever be a huge problem in your life. But if you can't talk about it, then when it shows up, that's why we have that phrase, the green-eyed monster. It's because when it shows up, we haven't talked about it since we were toddlers.
Mm.
If even then, when our siblings first showed up and our parents were like, hey, you have to be nice to them. It doesn't matter that you feel this way. If that's the last time somebody talked to you about jealousy, yeah, you could be 50 and it could just show up out of nowhere. And now you're on the floor. You're a disaster.
Yeah, I
So I
can't
think we need a
remember.
national conversation about jealousy.
Oh, for sure. I cannot remember the last time jealousy was talked about. I mean,
Well,
I'm not sure I even had a reason to, but I really can't remember that.
well, but in hundreds of interviews with people, I have asked them, so did your parents talk to you about emotions? And it's like 50-50. Some people are like, yeah, my parents didn't talk about emotions. And some people are like, yeah, sure they did. Cool. Did your parents teach you about sadness? Yeah. Yeah. Those people who had emotional conversations. Anger? Yeah. I mean, I got in this fight or whatever. Jealousy? Crickets. I've
Yeah.
literally never had one person say, yeah, my parents talked to me about what to do when jealousy shows up. I got into this thing in middle school and it was all a wreck and my parents sat me down and they talked about it. I think this will be different. I really believe that Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they're going to have different experiences because their parents were raised in a more emotionally aware status. So they have the capacity to do that. But we weren't taught what to do with jealousy. So we got to teach ourselves.
Which literally leads me to the questions I was going to ask you. Is I think you said there was 10 different types of jealousy. Are we, do we have those based on the environment we grew up in? Are those kind of passed on to us, or how do we develop those? Let's say I'm specific type of one or two. Like, where do I get that from?
Yeah, they're context dependent. So, like, let's just the broadest categories of jealousy are, rational jealousy, jealousy that is there because there is quite literally a threat present. And that's just rational jealousy. So, in a context you find yourself in, you're at that party, and all of a sudden, oh, my partner is now no longer in sight, and then I find them, and they're in a coat closet. That is rational jealousy. You have a fidelity agreement, you have expectations, and now you've been faced with this. So then there are other kinds of jealousy. Like when I talk to people about things like justice jealousy. Justice jealousy is when my partner is doing for someone else what they won't do for me.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? That is context dependent too. I'm not necessarily going to know what to do with it when it shows up because, damn, I didn't even know that was possible. I've seen people experience justice jealousy when their partner gets a new best friend, and all of a sudden there's like this energy and planning and stuff. And it comes up a lot in non-monogamy as well, because all of a sudden you get a new partner and you find your partner who's never been able to plan dates for you, all of a sudden is planning dates for someone else. Well, fuck that. That's pretty upsetting. So the different types of jealousy are going to have to do with the different situations we find ourselves in, and yeah, also how we were raised and the leftover wounds that we have going on. It has a lot to do with how much work we've been able to do on ourselves and how much our partners over the years have been able to show up to building relationship skills and doing the icky stuff, like dealing with all the leftover reparenting wounds that are there that we just got to deal with. If your partner's been able to be there for you, it's going to be easier to deal with.
Yeah, what happens if you're into this lifestyle, or you want to test the waters in this lifestyle, and your partner's putting in more energy into someone else than yourself? I mean, I didn't think about that. Wow. So what happens in that situation?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to make a note. For some people, this is a lifestyle. For some people, this is their life. This is their orientation. So I just want
Mhm.
to shout
I
out to the
appreciate
people
that.
who are like, this is me. This is my me.
Appreciate that.
If you're experiencing justice jealousy, yeah, all of a sudden a partner who maybe couldn't do emotional labor or wasn't pulling their weight in the household, all of a sudden can do that for someone else. This is often a make it or break it moment in people's open relationship experiences. A lot of people imagine it's going to be like, oh my God, the first time that they have sex with someone else or the first time they go on a date with someone else. They think that's going to be the moment. It is often that it's justice jealousy that gets you. Because in reality, and this is one of the hardest things to face, as we're with our partners, we habituate to them, we come up with our patterns, and we get into our grooves. A new person comes along, they set off new neural pathways. All sorts of new stuff is firing. Stuff that was offline for our partner, all of a sudden maybe online. So the question isn't whether they're doing stuff for someone else that they won't do for you. It's, will they come back to the negotiating table with you and say, hey, so you we haven't been splitting our emotional labor fairly for years. And I thought I had made my peace with that. I was like, you know what? This is you. I know that, your parents weren't touchy-feely. You didn't have that available. So I just, I was like, okay. But now I'm watching you with her. And you do have this. And it is killing me. And this is when I find people in my office doing the work of like, wow, turns out I have to be able, when I said at the beginning of our conversation, I said some people have the capacity to relate
Mm.
to multiple people simultaneously. That capacity comes because you make the capacity, right? Like I can't just be like, yeah, I feel like dating 2 or 3 or 4 people. I have to actually make that possible. If I get lazy or I decide, you know what, but I just don't feel inspired to do emotional labor for you. Oh, well, that's not appropriate. Like, you don't get to decide to not invest in our relationship now that you have a new relationship. And that's where I often see people come back to the basics. Often they've been open for 6 to 18 months and they're like, okay, we did some stuff. It was super fun. And then it got really, really hard. I'm like, okay, we got to go back to the basics. Often they don't have clear agreements. They have more of a situation. They have verbal agreements, but they don't have written agreements, or they have a rules-based system, but they don't actually understand the philosophy that they're operating on. So we have to go all the way back, build repair skills, build agreement-making processes. When I work with people, it's a minimum of a year, a minimum, because this is a paradigm shift. It's not a small thing.
The question is popping into my head right now, how initially we mentioned that a lot of monogamous relationships just don't work. What the divorce rate? Do you know what the divorce rate is? Is it 50, lower than 50, above 50?
Yeah, it's always hovering somewhere between 48 and 53, every study I see.
Oh God, it's terrible.
And wait, for second marriages, it's like 75%.
It's a worse. You think it'd be better
Oh,
because you
yeah.
learned your lesson the first time.
No, it's
Don't
not
marry a
about that. Yeah,
golfer.
but you also know not to stay when it gets bad. So,
Yeah, it's true too. Double-edged sword. So
yep.
my question to you almost is like, how do you measure success
Oh,
in a
I love that
polyamorous relationship?
question.
Yes, I'm glad I
I
asked it.
love that question so much, Ryan. You are the first person to ask me that question since my dissertation proposal. So, in monogamous relationships, we prioritize longevity. durability. Did this relationship last? It does not matter if you get to that 50-year anniversary party and those two people are standing next to each other and everybody at the party knows that they hate each other. It doesn't matter.
Mhm.
They lasted. They followed the one rule to rule them all. Personally, I'm not interested in that. So I don't measure the success rate of a non-monogamous relationship or any relationship by that longevity marker. Instead, I use a few different markers. One is, how well are these people able to support each other's growth processes? How does it feel? Like, what is the lived experience of, I am going through a huge change for the positive or for the negative? How well do we show up for each other? Another is, how well do we transition? Relationships don't stay the same. My most beloved Jungian analyst, Thayer Green, told me that he had been with his wife for 70 years. And he said, oh, we've been married 8 or 9 times now. We go through these huge iterative changes and shifts. So he was monogamous. He was very clear about that. And he also recognized that being able to transition and allow the relationship to change was the hallmark. That was the great part, not the 70 years. It was that they were massively different people over and over again, and they showed up to that mystery together. So many people don't do that. And sometimes, and this is a third hallmark, when the transition is one that makes it clear that we're no longer suited for each other, can we transition out gracefully? I will never respect a couple more than when they transition out of intimate relationship into whatever happens next, whether they become friends, whether they decide to just exit quietly and gently from each other, whether they move into platonic co-parenting, live-in nesting partners, whatever it is. Do they transition gracefully? Because that is mature relating, and that impresses the hell out of me.
Yeah, that's a lot of awareness too. Self-awareness is one of, for lack of a better term, the sexiest attributes that somebody can have is just being aware. Not even just this situation, just in life, period. Just being aware of your surroundings.
Exactly.
What you just talked about reminded me. Are you aware of Matthew Hussey?
I know the name. Where do I know it from?
He's a relationship expert, kind of
Oh,
a coach, if you
yeah.
will. I genuinely I really like his stuff. I listen to him, I listen to his podcast. He's really good. And I remember he was talking, I believe it was about Esther Perel, saying like, to make like long relationships last is you got to see each other through new eyes, look at
Yeah.
each other differently and your growth. And that's something that's kind of stuck with me over these last few years, and just looking at things, look at my wife through a new lens occasionally and stuff. And it helps bring that spark back, you know?
Right. And to do that, I have to also be able to witness myself through the
Yeah.
lens of multiplicity.
Oh,
Can I
true.
allow myself to be changed? Most of us, especially if we were raised in religious households, we were taught to be one thing. To be coherent is to be completely stable, to be monolithic. It is incredibly damaging to the psyche to see oneself that way, especially as we hit our mid-years, right? Especially when we hit our second adulthood. What happens when you won life? Let's say you did all the things. You got married, you had the kids, you did the house, you did the career, you won. Great, awesome. You won. Check. Now what? Now what? Are
Well,
you
you
just
won
gonna
based on society though, right? I mean,
right? But
society
if
said to
you
have a
don't get to
house.
right, and if you don't get to change from there, if you don't get to grow, if you don't get to see yourself with fresh eyes, those last 20, 30, 40 years are gonna suck.
Yeah.
They're not. So your relationship to yourself can be treated the same way. I love looking at my relationship to myself, my relationship to my partners, and my relationship to my children as just an ongoing iterative process of, oh, you know what? There's grit in the gears right now. I probably don't know them as they actually are right now. Great. That means I have somebody new to get to know. That's amazing. That's the oxygen that Esther's talking about. Oxygen for the fire.
I feel like I can ask you this question. Why did you get married so young? Not just why, but also if you didn't get married so young, do you feel that your perspective today would be different? Or did that
Mm.
shape your perspective on relationships?
I got married young. Those great parents that I really, really love. Well,
Yeah.
one of them was also incredibly emotionally avoidant and talked about me as if I were property. That was my dad. And the other one was deeply mentally ill. I love my mother. She was a brilliant woman with massive bipolar disorder. And I wanted stability. I wanted somebody who could get me out of there. So I married the first boy who showed interest in me. And he was wonderful in that he was stable in many ways. And
How
we
old
had
was he?
he was just a year older than I was. He proposed when he was in freshman year of college. I was in senior year of high school.
So what was up with him?
Actually, yeah, nothing. He had two like very white collar, well-educated parents. And a lot of people in so I'm Gen X. I'm 48. And I found that in my particular, I described before, I live in the city I grew up in, a red pocket in a blue state. Getting married young was perfectly acceptable, whether you
Yeah.
went to college or not. So for us, it was fine, but I didn't know. And this is you. So you asked me, why did I get married young? I didn't know that I was going to be trapped. I didn't know that, and this was the biggest problem he and I had, was that there was going to be a point at which he just needed things to get level and just like, okay, now we're going to just ride it out. And now I have watched his parents and I've watched him in the life he has recreated for himself. And I'm like, oh, I was never going to fit there. I am a reiterator. I am a challenger. That is my nature. I am constantly reinventing myself. This is not even going to be my last PhD. I'm certain of it. That's just me. So I was never going to fit there in the long term. And I think a lot of us have to make a decision about, well, am I going to be myself or am I going to be who I promised to be once upon a time? They're both hard choices. I don't think there's one that's better than the other. I chose the one I chose.
Yeah, and I do remember answering your question earlier about why I got married. Like being myself is just really important. I'm like really happy with myself. I'm really proud of myself, and to change or to bend to someone else's will just doesn't sound very appealing to me. Do people change? I know that's kind of a loaded question, and I'm sure
I
in
can
some ways
answer it.
people do, but yeah, please do.
I can answer it 100%. They do. I have proof. I have proof in front of me. I have that father who acted like he owned me, who then
Yeah.
later was able to get incredibly introspective. I watched a mother who was so ill when I was a young child, would literally chase me around with a knife,
Ooh.
become the most loving grandmother, the most loving, caring, devoted grandmother I could possibly have imagined. And I live next door. So it was like I got to see it up close. I watched my ex-husband, who I love. He's a wonderful person who went through major changes. We no longer suited each other. And I watched him change himself into a man who could have the monogamous life that he wanted, like transform his life to be truly, he has exactly the life he wants, not the unnegotiated nonsense that he and I had. We didn't talk about this stuff. No, he has exactly what he wants. And I watch my clients do it all the time. They make bad choices. They are in infidelity, or they are opening up and just making really bad choices based on what they imagine is like, oh, this is just what everybody does. And then they choose to get conscious. Consciousness is always a choice, but it is the hard choice.
I've loved talking to you. I love talking to a psychologist. I love talking to somebody so aware and somebody so honest. This has been awesome. And I feel like this is it's a pretty solid time to kind of put some of a bow on this, but I kind of want to revisit like, so if you're listening to this conversation, I want to ask you, when is a good time to just be content and happy with the situation that you're in versus when is possible time to expand your horizons, and open up and have that perhaps difficult relationship with your significant other? Because I imagine there's people every day struggling with that question. Like, I have it good. I like what I got. Do I want to test the waters? Do I want to take that chance and ripple the shit out of the calm waters of my life?
Yeah. Well, I think that there are a million good enough times. They're good enough. There are also quite a few times that I would say, do not just no. You can even have the conversations. You can start talking about it, but don't get on dating apps. Don't go starting to hook up with your best friend. Don't go to a sex party. Don't do that when you just got pregnant. Like when your wife just got pregnant, now is not your
Mhm.
moment. Now is not your moment. Breathe in and out. Bring that baby into the world. Settle into your parenting for at least 2 years. At least 2 years. This is mom of seven here. At least 2 years. Then there's also when you've just gone through a major loss, whether that is a death or a change of job. It's not that you shouldn't consider this. It's that remember that you are in an altered state. You're already in an altered state. So slow your roll. If you're going to explore those rippling waters, slow down. There's no harm in slowing down and get help. You do not know what you don't know. What you imagine is, I guarantee it is not going to be enough. What you can imagine is just a narrow slice of the possibilities. You need to have help by your side, whether that is a coach, whether that is a community, whether that is a therapist who is specifically trained in these particular rippling waters. Not just every therapist can do this. Or the other time when I would say, I wouldn't recommend it, but gosh darn it, a lot of people considered during COVID. They percolated during COVID. They kicked around the ideas. They kicked around the ideas. And then as soon as COVID, like the gates reopened, people threw those gates open and they did it really fast. So again, I would just say, slow down, calm down. If you find yourself in a pandemic and things start to look real interesting on the outside, just when the gates open, go slow. And one more time, most people finally bring this topic up when they are on vacation, they're on a weekend getaway, a couple bottles of wine have been opened, they find things feel loose. They also feel the relaxation of having space and emotional attention to spend on this conversation. That's great. I love that in that space, you're getting into like, wow, what is possible for us? But remember that that's in like your coolest, most level, most emotionally available state. So again, make sure that as you take action on that and you take that conversation home to regular life, that you surround yourself not just with the monogamous imagination, but with people who've already been there, people who already did this work and can help you imagine past your narrow view.
I also feel that people might bring this up as well when they're on their last leg, correct? You probably deal with that all the time. Like
All
this
the
is the
time.
last hope. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does it
I
ever
mean, it's,
work as a last option? Does that ever work?
well, again, this is where I would have to say, what does work mean? So
Mm-hmm.
if what you mean is we actually are friends, we are friendly enough that we could figure out how to be like, let's say, co-parents, nesting in the same house, but actually have different partners. Yeah, I have seen that work. That is the exception to the rule. If you think this is going to save a failing marriage, it's going to do that just as well as a baby would. It just no.
That was my question
However,
exactly. Will it help save the relationship?
yeah, but then we have to ask the question, what does it mean? What are we saving exactly?
Mm-hmm.
If the relationship is already struggling, I mean, this could be a faster way to shoot the horse. For some people, I think that it becomes the thing that like, oh, we come out, we do this, we go on this exploration, and what we find out is we don't have repair skills. We don't have a desire to show up and fix what was hurt from the past. We don't have a desire to rebuild our intimacy and communication. Oh, this was over before we ever opened. So then the opening gets blamed, but it wasn't the opening. It was the fact that they never had those things, or those things had gone years ago. And what can we do but acknowledge the fact that most people will have to have a catalyzing event in order to finally end a relationship. For some people, they'll say the catalyzing event is the opening. That's what I said. I opened this conversation and said, yeah, I opened my marriage and I did it all the wrong ways. And if I went back and pieced together my relationship, it was very clear. There were multiple times when, wow, we really should have figured out that we weren't on the same trajectory. But it wasn't until there was a catalyst like kerosene poured on that tinder before we really were able to say like, wow, we are going to burn this to the ground because sometimes a forest fire needs to happen.
Mm.
And so it did.
What a super interesting conversation. This is awesome. I've really enjoyed this. And I
I'm
might as
so
well
glad.
ask you, this is the pursuit of happiness. Are you happy? I mean, you seem
Oh
really
my God.
happy. Yeah. I
I
mean,
am
so
really happy.
I want to ask that because it's like sometimes I just want to be clear that somebody who is in a non-monogamous relationship that has genuine happiness, and you're saying that you're really happy right now. You've smiled this entire time. You're
Yeah.
talking with energy, so I mean I believe it.
Yeah.
So,
One of the reasons that I am out and that my partner is on our podcast. He's a very shy guy, like, but he's on it because we don't have enough stories of just happy people. We look like the soccer. We drive a 12 passenger van. We look like the soccer couple. Like he's a software engineer. Like we're boring and we're really happy and we get to fuck other people. I mean, what do I have to be
do you
sad
ever
about,
get
Ryan?
text messages from somebody like, "Hey, I saw your wife at the so and so restaurant with another guy"? Do you ever get like text messages like that?
We, yeah, we get some of that, although less and less because we're more and more public facing, so
Yeah.
people know already. But the really, the thing that I get is people who are like, I can tell that they're interested in my husband. Like I know that they are, and they come to me and they're like, would it be okay? And I'm like, babe, I'm not in charge of where he puts his
Yeah.
penis.
Hold on
Just
a
go ask him.
second.
Just go ask him.
I was wrapping up this conversation, but now I'm genuinely curious. So how does that even happen as a couple? Let's say you're out to dinner, someone approaches you. Like, how does someone
No,
even
this will
know to do
happen.
that?
No, this will happen in the scenario where like we're talking on a panel about non-monogamy or we're at an event where people are like
It's
they're
very
aware that there
clear.
are multiple kind of relationships going on. We also flag intentionally like I wear shirts that say I'm polyamorous. We have different ways that we let each other know. I also rarely wear a wedding band. He usually does wear a wedding band because he likes it. I like other rings. It's so there are many ways, but also like I am public facing. Like people know. And and yet their monogamous imagination catches them and they think, well, I'll go to her because that's respectful of their relationship, which is absolutely not how polyamory works.
Hmm.
Swingers do work that way. This in swinger culture, there is the relationship is a priori to the individuals in the relationship. But in polyamory, it's the opposite. The individuals are individuals. We treat them as individuals with agency and autonomy who make their own decisions. And if they have agreements where they disclose about what they disclose, then that's up to them to do. So really what it is if you're interested in someone, you got to ask them, what are your agreements? What are you available for? What are you not available for? From there, it's just like dating anybody else.
Super interesting. I love this. You're welcome back anytime, by the way. There's probably way
This
more
was
questions I got. So
this was a blast. You asked really good questions. I'm really glad I was here.
I appreciate that. That means a lot to me. And where can people find you, follow you, or hell, even work with you if they want to?
Yeah. Okay. So first things first, if this piqued your interest, just go to openeasier.com because that's going to get you hooked into my salon, 5 pillars of successful open relating. We need to have good foundations. So whether you're like, what is this? Or you are actually already like, yeah, I think I need to know more, go to Open Easier. If you're not even sure, if that's like a bridge too far, but you are curious about how ready you might be for this, go to joliquiz.com, joliquiz.com. That's a 10-question quiz based out of my research that helps you figure out where you are on the scale from like, oh, hell no, do not consider this yet. You have a lot of work to do, all the way over to like, yeah, you're basically ready. We just got to get you some last steps. I love helping people do this work. And some of the work is just determining if this is a fit for you or not.
Mhm.
Because if it's not, great, then put the thought aside. Like run that question down, come to your answer, and turn your attention back to the kind of partnerships that you actually do want to have.
Awesome. I'll put all those links in the show notes. So scroll down, go ahead and click on that. So I'll say thanks for coming on. Thank you for enlightening not just me, but my audience and I'm sure many other people. Like just super enlightening. I love to learn. I love to be, like you said, curious. I like to ask questions. So I learned a lot and I'm sure everybody did. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
We'll definitely talk soon. Okay.
Yeah.